let me start out here and let me pose a couple of scenarios to you and get your response. And I have made the observation, and I think you would concur, it seems like the West Wing of the White House is kind of now run by the left wing. Leftists are in charge. Conservatives in the Trump administration in high positions are quickly disappearing. It seems to me, and I'm get your response here, that the leftists are undercutting President Trump's agenda, and I would particularly look at a couple of them, including Jared Kushner. And then I've got a couple of quotes by you, and I want you to expound on them. You said to me, the ruling class will not go quietly into the night. Let's stop right there and have you explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, this is what I mean. The ruling class is Washington, D.C. It's the bubble, or what's called the swamp. It is the people who are the denizens of Washington who are permanently there, and they believe in big government, and they believe in an unending supply of our money going into Washington, D.C., so they can spend it however they best see fit. And the American people are tired of that. That's what I meant by that.
Mm-hmm. And we communicated both verbally and some email, and you said this to me. Now, let me sort of preclude what I'm going to say by stating that in the last 10 days or so, there's been some, quite frankly, for many weeks, there's been some troubling things going on in the Trump administration. We're going to talk about some of that. And a couple of other things you said to me. Quite frankly, you said there's no one left in D.C. who even remembers the reason why there was a miraculous election on November the 8th. And then you went on to say that the people thought Donald Trump was an outsider who was brave enough to say that what the people actually were thinking, meaning an end to illegal immigration, repeal of Obamacare, let's keep radical Islam out of America. And then you went on to say a couple of things that startled me. D.C. is a living nightmare for the sane voters who tried to save the country in November. And then you concluded, you said, no one around President Trump is telling him the truth. Let's go back and have you explain what you mean by no one left in D.C. who even remembers the reason why there was a miraculous election on November 8th.
Well, we all know that there was a miraculous election, that God gave us a reprieve by putting Donald Trump into the White House. We're very excited about that. I absolutely believe that it was the vote of evangelical Christians who put President Trump over the top. And I do believe that his gut instincts are good and right for the country. But we all know from Scripture that the counselors who speak into the president's ears are critically important, especially because Donald Trump has been an extremely successful man, both with property development in New York City and also with being the king of the entertainment industry in New York City with The Apprentice and the Celebrity Apprentice television shows. He was number one, and he had made it to the top. When it comes to policy, this is a new venue for him, but he made it to the top all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I believe without a shadow of a doubt that he is the one who needs to be there. However, those who are around the President of the United States, many of them are very liberal Democrats by background, and the advice that he's been given, and we take that advice by looking at the policy that's coming out of the White House, it's more reflective of what has been coming out of the left as opposed to conservatives. That's why people are very concerned, because when we lose elections, we understand that the radical left policies will go forward, and that is grievous.
Right.
But when we win elections, we usually think that conservative policy will come out of the White House. But it seems like even when we win, sometimes we're losing. And that is disheartening, I think, for voters, and especially to think that the top advisors to the President of the United States seem to be coming from a perspective that is not in line with the President's goals. You just iterated them when you said that the President wanted to end illegal immigration into the United States and build a wall. He wanted to repeal Obamacare. And third, he wanted to keep radical Islam out of the United States. The voters agreed with him. Mm-hmm. They said, finally, somebody is speaking sanity. They put him in the White House. And now we're seeing different results, and that's very disheartening to the voter.
Well, you say D.C. is a living nightmare for the sane voters who tried to save the country in November, and I want you to expound on that, but I realize over the weeks we've kind of been reeling from some things. We've got the DACA decision, which I think is, we don't know how that's going to play out yet, but just all sorts of things, and again, it goes back to my open that the West Wing kind of is now the left wing, but D.C., a living nightmare for the sane voters? Explain.
Well, D.C. is a living nightmare in that the voters went to the polls. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. They gave money, they volunteered, they voted. And they voted believing that the biblical values that they stand for would be implemented in Washington, D.C., because that's what the elected officials promised.
Right.
Now we're seeing something completely different. So it's a living nightmare in that those officials, in about 5 seconds, forgot what they said they were going to do. And so the living nightmare that is going on is that all that we believed, all that we hoped, in what we wanted at the ballot box, now we're hearing something completely different from the Republicans in Washington, D.C.
Right.
That's disheartening.
That is
we
very
expected
disheartening.
that from the Democrats. And I hate to say it in a broad-based way because you'd hope that some Democrats would feel a little bit more conservative. You would hope that there'd be more bipartisanship. There's very little bipartisanship that goes on some of these bigger issues. On smaller, inconsequential issues, certainly there's bipartisanship.
Okay, you and I have talked about the fact that there are so many Obama holdovers that remain, and they're also holding up a more conservative agenda. Does President Donald Trump, can he not get rid of some of these Obama holdovers?
Oh, he absolutely should. And I think actually Donald Trump is probably a very effective leader of heading up an organization. And I don't quite understand in many ways why Paul Ryan, who's the head of the House of Representatives, and Mitch McConnell, who's the head of the United States Senate, I don't really understand why President Trump hasn't been able to get them to go along with President Trump's agenda. After all, that's the winning agenda.
Yes.
The agenda that President Trump wants to advance, which again is stop illegal immigration, pass repeal of Obamacare, and keep radical Islam out of the United States. Tax reform comes below that, and also religious liberty, standing for Israel. Those are all the big issues that got President Obama into office. If Paul Ryan is an impediment, and if Mitch McConnell is an impediment, and they certainly give every indication that they are to achieving this agenda, I'm really surprised that Donald Trump, with his skills, hasn't been able to get better cooperation out of those two. And really, at this point, I'm actually, I don't know if blame is the right word, but I really call on the rank and file members of U.S. House and U.S. Senate. It's up to them. When you have Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell standing in the way of the people's voice, then it's up to each of these members to say, you know, if you can't go along with what the people said last November 8th, then maybe these leaders need to go. Maybe Paul Ryan needs to go. Maybe Mitch McConnell needs to go. And we need to get somebody else in there who's going to fulfill the will of the people.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell, and I have on the line today from New York City, Michelle Bachmann. As you know, she served in Congress from 2006 to, I believe, January 1st, 2015. She ran for president in 2012. She's one of my speakers at Understanding the Times 2017, along with Amir Sarfati, Pastor J.D. Farag, and Dr. Mark Hitchcock, right outside Minneapolis, Minnesota, Grace Church, Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and that's Saturday, October the 7th. And Michelle, right after the devastation of Hurricane Harvey, and actually before the devastation of Hurricane Irma, President Trump declared a national day of prayer. Evangelicals met with him in the Oval Office. I don't believe you were there, but there were a number of them there, including Pastor Robert Jeffress and others, and they prayed at that time and then declared the following Sunday to be a day of prayer for America and for those harmed by some of our natural disasters. And quite frankly, all focus has been on two hurricanes. We have the West on fire, which is tragic beyond our words and beyond our comprehension. And to those of you living in the West, we know what you're going through. It's just the cameras have not been there. Nonetheless, Michelle, you said to me that the prayer effort in the Oval Office, this is a couple of 3 weeks ago now, was not a photo op, that Donald Trump believes in prayer.
Amen. And you saw that evident with Robert Jeffress's wonderful prayer. President Trump understands what a wonderful man of God Robert Jeffress is, and that's why I believe he had Robert Jeffress offer the prayer. He is the pastor of First Baptist in Dallas, and just as solid as a believer can possibly be. President Trump has a lot of trust and faith in his Faith Executive Advisory Committee, and they're trying to widen that committee. I was in the initial, 30 people in the original Executive Advisory Committee, and they're trying to add more people and bring more in who are godly leaders in our country. Now, think of that. That didn't happen in the previous 8 years under Barack Obama. This really is a first, where the White House is seeking out pastors to come into the Oval Office for prayer and for being a part of this executive advisory committee, because quite simply, President Trump recognizes the power of prayer and that he is a man under authority. That's why this is really mixed, the Trump administration. President Trump himself, I have great admiration and respect for. I believe that his gut is exactly right. He is humble before the Lord. That's how I have observed him, as a man who isn't just a photo op. He's not doing this as a gimmick. This is real for him. Behind closed doors for 16 years, he had regular input from pastors and a spiritual pastoral advisor.
Mm-hmm.
So this is when no one was looking, when he wasn't even involved in politics, when he was just a business guy. He was seeking out after God. So I think this is something that should give us great hope. But again, you and I have talked about this on air before with your listeners. What is so important and crucial for us as believers, this is where we come in. We are commanded, as Paul told us, to be in prayer for those in authority. And we need to be in prayer, serious prayer, for godly advisors to speak into the president's ears. I truly believe, Jan, that if godly advisors would speak into the president's ear, we would see an end to this stumble-bumble that seems to go on. And I think we would not see decisions come out where one day the White House view is on one side of an issue, and on the next day the White House comes on the other side of the issue. Nobody knows what to believe. I think that would stop if we had godly advisors speaking into the president's ear. That's a real lack, in my opinion, in the White House today. I have confidence in our president. I have confidence in our vice president. But again, our president has not been steeped in policy. And so he has good gut instincts, but he needs godly wisdom. So we need to be in prayer